First this morning to the sad death, apparently by suicide, of the Oscar-winning actor and comedian Robin Williams. He'd battled with alcohol, drugs and depression for many years. To look back over his career, I'm joined now by film critic with the Irish Times, Donald Clarke, and by our own Adele Coffey, who's been trawling through the archives this morning, so we can hear again from some of his best-known characters. Thank you both very much for joining me. Donald, if I can go to you first of all, what was it about Robin Williams that was so unique, so special? I mean, you can see the impact he had on so many people's lives by the reaction to this sad news today.
It's interesting. I think if you think back to the late 1970s, the mid-1970s, more accurately, when he emerged first in Happy Days and then in Mork and Mindy, I think that before then you'd seen something a little bit like improvisational comedy. You'd seen a kind of anarchy, and I don't know, even going back to the Marx Brothers, but you'd rarely seen that degree of unhinged diversions in comedy, on mainstream television programs and mainstream films. It might have been something you found in downtown clubs, but that degree of kind of total antic craziness was something that you really hadn't encountered before. I mean, it was a bit like, if you look at what he's doing in that early work, and particularly actually in his stand-up comedy, it's a bit like jazz. I mean, that's something people say a lot about comedy, but this is really like jazz, or it's like postmodern novelists like Thomas Pynchon. He picks up on something and runs and runs and runs with it. That could have at times become indulgent later in his career, but it was something that you really hadn't seen before on mainstream entertainment. So I think people hitched onto that. There was a kind of vulnerability and likability to him as well that people identified with, which worked through his films and his personal appearances.
Yeah, absolutely, all the way through his career. As I say, we're also joined by Adele Coffey. Now, Adele, you have been looking through the archives. You have something from the Mork and Mindy days.
Yeah, and it's funny what Donald was just saying there, because all of that physical comedy from his early stand-up days, it doesn't work when you listen to it. You have to see it, because it was so incredible to watch him. So many of the jokes were just the twitch of an eyebrow or, a certain look, so they don't actually work on radio. But there is, of course, Donald will remember Mork and Mindy. I remember it from the 80s. As a really big sort of show in my childhood.
It was a huge hit, wasn't it?
Yeah, I loved him, absolutely loved him. So this is a scene where Mork, who was an alien and they're not supposed to have feelings, is discovering some feelings that he has for Mindy.
Remember that girl I told you about?
Yes.
Well, she did something very nice. She defended me against her father. That was a very brave and kind thing to do, and I don't know, I think I'm coming down with feelings for her.
Mork, you know emotions are hazardous to your health. Don't start playing around with that stuff.
No, not me. You can trust me, sir. This is Mork, signing off from Boulder, Colorado.
Clip there from Mork and Mindy going right back to the 80s. Donald, obviously he's so well known for his comedy roles, but he also did quite a lot of much more sombre acting too.
Well, he did, and I would say that the performances I liked best are those when he appeared to be playing against type, though it should be remembered he trained at Juilliard in New York.
Juilliard, really?
Prestigious acting college. So that was always there, like, in his arsenal, and then drifted into comedy after that. But yeah, well, it's an interesting thing is that I think, to my mind, the best Robin Williams performances were those that came relatively late in the career, when he, in a sense, used that kind of childishness, that childlike quality rather than childishness, that we were used to sinister effect. I'm thinking of films like 1 Hour Photo from about 10 years ago, where he played a sinister, malevolent character who worked in the 1 Hour Photo booth. Insomnia, the Christopher Nolan film, where again he played a murderer. It wasn't just the fact that he had it was good to see him be still, and he had the capacity to be still. It was also the fact that in the back of our minds we had this notion of Mork, and Adrian Cronauer in Good Morning Vietnam. We had that in the back of our minds while we were watching this very sinister figure, and that kind of added an extra layer to it, which made
an extra
the
layer of
character even
darkness
more
almost
sinister.
in 1 hour photo, because he really was a bizarre character in that film, wasn't he? I mean, Adele, you've been looking back at some of the, well, Dead Poets Society, of course, is a film.
Yeah,
he was,
and another one from my youth that I just remember really affecting me, it was this idea of, you know, it's a trope really, the idea of the teacher who really inspires all of his pupils, but it was such a brilliant film. And in that, I've chosen a clip actually because we all know the really famous scenes from that, but there's a clip in it where again you hear Robin Williams being his showing his talents, where he was such an amazing mimic as well, which again came into his comedy roles. And this is a scene where he's trying to get the students interested in Shakespeare.
Today we're going to be talking about William Shakespeare. Oh, God. I know. A lot of you look forward to this about as much as you look forward to root canal work. We're going to talk about Shakespeare as someone who writes something very interesting. Now, many of you have seen Shakespeare
Done very much like this. Oh, Titus, bring your friend hither.
But if any of you have seen Mr. Marlon Brando...
No, but Shakespeare can be different. France, Romans, countrymen. Let me read.
You can also imagine maybe John Wayne as Macbeth going, well, is this a dagger I see before me?
Donald, I mean, listening to that, he was an enormous talent, wasn't he?
He was, yeah, and though, I mean, initially, the directors often had problems, I think, containing his talent in films. I mean, it was an interesting thing that he started off when they first put him into movies. He did relatively straight roles. I mean, his first big role was Royal According to Garp, in which he's very good, though the film didn't really register. The problem, I think, was that that his talent for improvisation tended to take over the film and imbalance the film sometimes. The best examples, I think, of him doing that in cinema, of him being given his head in cinema, are probably in things like Good Morning Vietnam, where a performance is incorporated into the film. If you follow me? That is to say, when he was playing Agent Crodenauer on air, there was an excuse for him to do that. Elsewhere, it could become a little bit oppressive at times and overpower the film. But there's no question that he did something. He did that degree of manic improvisation in a way and with an energy that nobody had done before.
That's a really interesting
very
point, that he needed to be contained almost. Such was his talent for that improv that he would have learned through comedy, that when it came to film, the discipline of film was almost difficult for him to embrace. Adele,
Yeah, I think so, and I think the idea that you've got somebody there who has almost, and I'm not making any suggestions about what he suffered from or anything, but there was a kind of a manic nature to his performance. It was that kind of outlandish, hugely energetic, and he described his own performances, I think, as like jogging across the Golden Gate Bridge, where he said on one side you have somebody saying, you know, don't fall over, on the other side you have somebody saying you can fly, and it was that kind of constant struggle for his live performances anyway. So I think that did come through in his performance on film, and certainly when he was contained on film, he was excellent, and he went on to win the Oscar then for his role in Good Will Hunting in 1997, and that was a very contained role as well.
Yeah, and you have a clip of that as well.
We do indeed, yeah. This is the moment where he was a psychologist to Matt Damon's character, who was a troubled, genius man, and this is the point where he makes a breakthrough with him.
So, what is it, like Will has an attachment disorder? Is it all that stuff? Fear of abandonment? Is that why I broke up with Skylar?
I didn't know you had.
I did.
You want to talk about it?
No.
Hey, Will. I don't know a lot. You see this? All this shit. It's not your fault.
Yeah, I know that.
Look at me, son. It's not your fault.
I know.
It's not your fault.
I know.
No, you don't. It's not your fault.
I know.
It's not your fault.
Right.
It's not your fault.
You can hear Donald listening to that. I mean, a totally different Robin Williams there. That was his only Oscar award that he won for that film, but he was nominated for many of his other roles and indeed won plenty of other awards over his career.
He was nominated way back actually for Good Morning Vietnam. Way back then, and also for the Fisher King, I believe, as well, and at least one other that's not coming to me. But yeah, no, he was certainly honoured. I think, yeah, I mean, I think of what people. It's often wrong to try and kind of psychoanalyze somebody by looking at their performances or looking at their interviews. But I think that the sadness within him that we knew about and we'd read about, well, because he was very honest about his problems with cocaine and later alcohol, I think was visible on screen, and that did add poignancy to performances like that.
A kind of a vulnerability almost.
There's definitely, I mean, it's unquestionably a vulnerability there, which I think did come through and I think did enhance those less manic performances. Well, there's a real depth of character there, but I mean, not wanting to get too mordant on a sad day. I mean, it is worth listening to the number of stand-up comedians who felt that their careers wouldn't have happened without him. I mean, the likes of Eddie Izzard, that school of rambling.
That he was such a huge influence on that kind of
comedy based around diversions. I think they would admit that their school of comedy wouldn't exist without him.
Now, I'm also joined on the line now by Anthony Murray, who's on the line from County Meath. Anthony, thank you for taking our call this morning. You actually met Robin Williams when you were running the Dry Dock, a sober meeting place in San Francisco, back in the 80s. I mean, really at the early part of Robin Williams' career. Tell us how you got to meet him and what he was doing, what he was like at that place.
Well, first of all, it's a very sad day that Robin has passed, and one of the reasons I agreed to go on this radio program is to highlight, alcoholism and depression and suicidal ideation, which they go hand in hand. And I hopefully, if somebody's listening today who is suffering from the disease of alcoholism and is depressed, that they realize that there's help there. All they have to do is reach out and ask for it.
You've been through a journey yourself on it, Anthony. You were still drinking when you met Robin Williams first.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
I took a geographic to San Francisco in 1981. Geographic is a term that we use in recovery for alcoholics who have this notion that if they move or relocate, they will feel better about themselves. But it's that old cliche, wherever you go, there you are. And anyway, I met Robin probably in 1982 out in the Richmond district of San Francisco, where he was still doing stand-up comedy. His career was launched out there in the 70s, a place called the Last Day Saloon. And the Holy City Zoo was another place he used to do stand-up comic. Anyway, I was in the bar one night having a drink, and he bought me a drink. And it was my friend who pointed out to me who he was. I'm not big into movies or celebrities, so I was too drunk to know who I was, even not to mention who he might be.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's when I first met him, and then I got sober shortly thereafter, around 1984, and our paths, we didn't cross anymore because I guess he was still out there. But I think
did he come to the Dry Dock at all? I mean, did you know that he was seeking help himself at that point?
Well, I think what happened to Robin is that he stopped maybe cold turkey, and he did it for a long time on his own. I think he was dry for maybe 20 years.
And did you ever talk to him about it?
Oh yeah, when he come there, he started coming around to the meetings in about 2005. I think there was a big expose story in the tabloids about he relapsed, and he went to a treatment center, and then after the treatment center, he started coming to the Dry Dock to attend meetings, 12-step meetings.
Right, but I mean,
that's where I saw him.
And back in that time, did he talk to you about his difficulties with substances, or can you talk about that? Actually, was it done in confidence at the time, or were you talking to him bars?
He would share in the meetings about his difficulties, just like everybody else. The whole the whole strategy with 12-step recovery programs is to, it's all about anonymity and humility. And he just wanted to be there as another person in recovery. But it's extremely difficult if you're a celebrity, of course, because everybody wants a piece of you. And, there'll be guys trying to launch their careers and fellas looking for parts in movies. And, so that was but I made sure, that anyone who came in there who was well known, that they weren't harassed, that they were allowed the space.
And Anthony, what kind of a man was he when you met him? I mean, was he as gregarious as you think?
Like some of the previous speakers mentioned there, he was a very shy individual. He was a very lovable character. He was modest. He was sort of introverted. I always got the impression that he was enduring all kinds of inner conflict. He was a man who might have tortured in some respects.
Really.
But and he struggled. I could see that.
Yeah.
And there was an enormous pressure. I think he was experiencing internal pressure to be somebody.
Did he ever talk about why he felt like this, or did you ever discuss that with him?
No, I wasn't actually his counsellor per se. He obviously I think he did have a psychologist or a psychoanalyst that he was seeing, but no, he would only speak in a general way about what was going on with him.
Well, obviously, Anthony, a very sad morning for you to find out about the death of somebody that you would have known personally, even if so many years ago.
Again, in closing, I'd just like to say, if there's anybody out there who is feeling depressed and has a problem with alcohol, there's help out there. There's all kinds of help. Alcoholics Anonymous has a toll-free number that you can call, and somebody will call you back and take you to a meeting. And there is help out there,
So reach out for help. And indeed, we will be talking a little about that later in the programme with Console. But look, Anthony, thanks a million for taking our call this morning. Thank you. And Donald Clark, just to go back to you finally here, I mean, he leaves a huge legacy, doesn't he? I mean, there's no other performer that I can think of that is anything like him.
No, I don't think there is. I mean, it was always a tricky business bottling that kind of talent on film. And I don't think that there's anybody else who came from that world, that world of stand-up comedy, and managed to forge a career in quite that manner. I mean, someone like Steve Martin maybe did, but then Martin was never really had the popular appeal that Williams had, because it's worth remembering that he had enormous appeal to kids as well, which is an important thing.
That's true, I mean, Mrs Doubtfire, RV.
Yeah, there was a vast kind of, there was a huge, his demographic, to use those cold Hollywood terms, was enormous. I mean, you went straight from a film like Insomnia, a Christopher Nolan film, all the way to Aladdin, which, it's worth mentioning Aladdin, which, he was kind of a minor player and didn't really want his name mentioned, but, he really made that film what it is, one of the biggest Disney films of all time, through, again, doing very much
he always
the work
brought
he became famous for.
Some of himself to the role, didn't he, even if it was a cartoon character?
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, well, what's all about that is that you don't associate improvisational comedy with animation, but that was very much a Robin Williams role. I mean, they constructed the genie round his stage persona. He very much made that role his own and didn't compromise. So I think, yes, you asked the question. I do think kind of the breadth of people who were interested in his best work. It is worth saying that the last sort of 10 years or so, that his work was not always good. He did do quite a few rather poor family films and some rather broad comedies. But the best of his work, I think, appealed across a very wide demographic. Okay, well, listen, Donald Clark and Adele Coffey, thank you both very much indeed for joining us this morning.